Before the service, I'm sitting in my seat over there, and some people sometimes ask me, "Are you nervous when you get up to preach?" And no, normally I'm not, but because as I prepared for this, God has led me, so I know that the words I have to speak are His. I'm in a family of friends, so that's good. But then I got thinking, here I am surrounded with Andrew, who looks like he's left. Oh, there he is, and Oakley, and Nathaniel, Diane, Jackie, all the great preachers that we have in this house. And then I started to get nervous because I'm hoping I can please them as well as you. So we're going to do a few things a little differently today, as the pastor indicated. I got a high five from Brianna because we have no slideshow this morning. But there is going to be a bit of a show and tell to make up for it. The other thing is I'm going to do something that probably, I don't know if it's been done before, but I'm going to actually do not two, not three, but 4 books of the Bible in one message. Now, I know a few weeks ago Sean walked us through the Bible, and that was great, so I'm hoping that I can do that as well. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, I don't want to say preach, but preach isn't the right word. I'm going to give a message in what's called a first-person message. So what that means is I'm going to take on the persona of somebody in the Bible and share his story, his life, and what it was like for him to be one of the servants of God. You might ask why I would want to do this. Well, has anybody here heard of somebody called Northrop Lyle? No, I didn't think so. Northrop Lyle is a fairly famous literary critic. He also was a professor of literature at the University of Toronto for a while. Oddly enough, his course was on Bible history, Bible literature. Now, Northrop was not a believer, but in his mind, the Bible was the greatest piece of literature ever written. It's the gold standard to which all literature should be compared. Now, for you, what's the most important thing in literature for you? Is it the plot? Is it, as Dave suggested a while ago, the subplots and the plot twists? The story, the characters? Well, for me, it's the characters. Interestingly enough, about 45% of the Bible is in the narrative. So that means it's stories, so it only makes sense to share a message occasionally in a story format. John shared about 3 weeks ago about stories and dopamine levels and all those nice things, and I'm sitting there going, hey, you're not stealing my thunder, are you? But I think we're hardwired for stories because long before there was the written word, there was the spoken word, and that's how history was shared. So one of the other things that's going to be different is I'm going to leave the stage now because it just seems more appropriate for me to talk to you from the floor. Now, you have to understand, unfortunately, I hurt my ankle yesterday, so this might be a bit of a chore. So the other reason I wanted to do this message in the first person was because wouldn't it be nice to ask some of the characters, be able to talk to some of the characters of the Bible, ask them. I'm thinking of Methuselah. Methuselah lived to be 969 years old. I turned 75 not too long ago, and yes, I'm relegated at home to using my walker. I have a lot less teeth in my mouth than I used to have. And I'm thinking, Methuselah, what 75 and I'm tired. But then I got thinking, excuse me, I'm going to sip. I got thinking, and said, Methuselah, the Bible tells us that Noah's father, one of the sons of Noah, after he and his brother, it was he and his brother, and I think they're significant because of Noah, but the Bible tells us that Methuselah had other children. Now think about that. over 969 years. So I got thinking, well, if Methuselah had 2 wives, and that's probably a very conservative estimate, and they each had 2 children, and they had 2 children, and they had, how many descendants of Noah were there at the time of Methuselah were there at the time of the flood? I got my calculator out, started working, and eventually I got this enormous number with a big E beside it, which means, the calculator is saying, I'm sorry, that's as far as I can go. So I was thinking, well, maybe somebody smarter than me had figured this out before, and I'm sure they would have posted it on the internet, so I looked it up. So other than Noah and his sons, how many descendants of Methuselah died in the flood? You know what the answer was I got? All of them. So my question for Methuselah would be, hey, dude, what were birthday parties like at your house? How many generations came? So I have one other quick example for you, and I'm going to ask Dave and Jack to come up. Interesting thing, I just found out, Jack, your last name is Wood, right?
Yes.
My grandfather was Jack Wood. So, Dave, if you would stand here beside Jack. So, so I'm going to give you a hint. David is playing David. Jack is playing Goliath. So, if you didn't know about David and Goliath, and this wasn't an after-school special, who do you think is going to win in this battle? Oh, well, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. Hang on. I forgot. Dave, you're 5'4". Now, according to history, Goliath was somewhere between 6'9" and 9'9". How tall are you, Jack?
6'6".
6'6". So we're not quite there. Now, I also believe that. Yeah, well, I was going to get there. I also believe that the 9'9" is the more accurate, and I'll tell you why. The Bible tells us that his spear was 2 inches in diameter. History tells us that the tip was 26 inches of iron, 7 inches at the base, and there was a counterweight at the other end. So let's see if we can do this. So Jack, up on the stage. So I brought this out, and my wife says, "You're not going to stand on the stool, are you?" So, no, I'm going to get Jack to stand on the stool. There's his sword. You have to imagine the tip and the counterweight. But in his other hand, he carried, that's the spear. He carried a sword that was 12 pounds. Now, you have to understand, a normal sword weighs 1.5 pounds. Okay, so again, 2 inches around, 12, 36 pounds. I'm thinking that Goliath was 9'9". Okay, so now, who's going to win this battle? Okay, I have one question for David, and actually for his commander. Dude, what in heaven's name were you thinking? 9'9". Okay, thanks, guys. So, as I said, I'm now going to share with you the story of Samson. Now, some of what I'm going to share is speculation from human nature, but I think it's fairly accurate. But I've done some studying in the Talmud and the Quran and got some details about Samson that you may not know from the Bible, because the Bible has, this is it, but there are other pieces of history and lore that just are not stated there. So, one moment. Good morning. My name is Samson. Yes, that's Samson. Now, my father was Manoah. He lived in the land of Judah, and he was from the tribe of Dan. I don't know why that's significant, but the elders seem to like to have us identify ourselves by tribe, so he was from the house of Dan. My mother, the Bible actually doesn't share my mother's name, and I think that's fairly common for some reason. The ladies are quite frequently anonymous. But anyway, my mother was barren. She was beyond the years of being able to have a child. And a man of God came to her and said, you shall have a child if you stop drinking wine, stop drinking other fermented drinks, eat only clean food. A son will be born unto you, and you will raise him as a Nazarite. Well, Mom was so excited, she ran to Dad and said, hey, a man of God told me I'm going to have a baby. So what was my dad's response? Well, I'm going to pray to God, and I'm going to ask him to come back and tell us. Like, dude, your wife just told you what the man of God said. Can't you just be happy with that? But anyway, he prayed, and God answered, and the man of God came back. My mother was in the field at that time, so she ran into town, got Dad, and he came out and said, so tell us, what do we have to do with our son? And they said, you must raise him as a Nazarite from birth until his death. Hang on a minute. What do you, till death? You got to understand that frequently the Nazarite oath was over a period of time. Even Paul did that a couple of times. How do I know? Well, I am one of the heroes of the faith, so I know some stuff that happened after my death. So anyway, not only is it time-related, here's some of the details. Can't drink wine, can't drink other fermented drinks, have to eat pure food, can't even go near a winery or the grape fields. Let's see. You got to live a pure life. And in addition to that, you can't cut your hair. So ordinarily with a Nazarite oath, you have all that, but at the end of the period, you shave your hair and you burned it as an offering to the Lord. Guess I wasn't going to get that chance. So anyway, I was born 10 months later, and I was such a beautiful baby. They say I had the face of an angel. The only problem was I had 2 club feet, so I was lame. And that meant I spent a lot of time inside, a lot of time studying, because I knew my destiny was to lead Judah. Well, in my late teens, I took off from home and went to Timnah on an excursion, and there I saw a Philistine beauty. She so enamored me that I went back home and said, Mom, Dad, I want this woman as my wife. Well, you can imagine they were thrilled that this Jewish boy wanted to marry a Gentile, and they said, Samson, can't you find somebody in our tribe, or a relative at least, to marry? I told them, no, I had to have this girl. They didn't know that God was leading me, because he had a plan for the Philistines. So back to Timnah we went. I was going ahead to make sure the road was clear, and I was approached by a lion. Well, the power of the Lord came upon me. Now, you need to understand that, yes, in my own right I was strong, but in times of need, the Lord empowered me. I was able to stand straight. My hair would actually vibrate and ring like bells. I killed the lion, threw it aside, didn't tell my parents. Maybe it was the carcass thing, I'm not sure. Off we went into Timnah. I met the girl, and it was decided we would get married. So we headed home. Now, a while later, we were headed back for the wedding. And at this time I was dragging, I'm sorry guys, I forgot to tell you, I'm going to be wandering around a little bit with cameras. I was lagging behind, because you need to understand at this time, I'm still a teenager. So I'm still pretty immature, and I've got a lot of curiosity. I wanted to know what happened with that lion. So I snuck aside and found the lion, and there it was, covered in bees. And in the carcass was a big vat of honey. I still had a pretty big sweet tooth, so I reached down, took some of that honey. Then I took some, gave it to my mother, but I didn't tell him where it came from, because as scared as I might have been of the Lord for touching a dead carcass. I was petrified that Mom would find out. I mean, please. You ever, yeah. Anyway, we went down to be married. So as was the custom, the Philistines sent 30 groomsmen to A, protect me, B, party with me, and just be with me for the duration of the nuptials. As was the custom at most festivals, I asked them a riddle. The riddle was, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Now, you guys know a little of my history, so I'm sure you can figure it out. But they were stumped. For 3 days, they guessed and guessed and guessed and couldn't get it right. Then they went to my wife and said, please, ask your husband what the answer is. We really want... Forgot to tell you, I promised to give each of them 30 pieces of clothing if they got this. If I got it, they needed to give me 30 pieces of clothing. So anyway, and they said, you know what? If you don't find out for us, we are going to kill you and your entire household. So my wife came to me and she begged, saying, Samson, please tell me. I mean, you're the love of my life. I mean, tell me, please. And I said, look, I haven't even told my mother and my father the answer to this riddle, so why should I share it with you? Well, she went away and she cried for several days. Finally, I relented. I told her the answer. The 30 came to me and said, hey, we know the answer. Nothing is sweeter than honey, and nothing is stronger than a lion. Said, you're right. But you had to browbeat my wife to get that answer. So you'll get your clothing, but you're going to have to wait. So I went down into Ashkelon. I killed 30 Philistines. I took their clothing and I gave it to the 30 party goers. I was like, oh, really? And then, you know what, I was so fed up with the whole situation, I went home to my parents' house. A while later, I was kind of missing my wife and thought, yeah, I probably should spend some time with her. So I went back to my father-in-law's house. And I said, I'm going to where's my wife's room? And he says, dude, I thought you hated her, so I gave her away to one of your groomsmen. Please. He says, but I'll tell you what, I've got a younger daughter who's even more pretty. You can have her. You ever heard the expression, you Philistine? Well, I think I know where it came from. But I was so, you got to understand, I'm still like 20 years old here. I was so irate, so frustrated, I went out and I captured 300 foxes. Now, I'll leave this to your imagination. Did I really do that, or did I get my troops to help me do that? But bottom line is I got 300 foxes. I tied their tails together in pairs, tied a torch to those tails, lit it, and let them loose in the fields of the Philistines. Burn up their wheat, burn up their corn, the sheaves in the fields, everything. Now, PETA probably didn't like me very much, but think about this. I designed it in such a way that the torch would burn up to the rope tied around their tails. It would break, and the foxes would have the chance to get away. Yeah, maybe I singed a few tails along the way, but I got the job done. Well, when the Philistines found out what I did, the Philistines came to my family and said, who did this? And they told him it was me. You know what they did? They burned my wife, they burned my father-in-law and their whole household. I mean, my father-in-law, yeah, no big deal. He wasn't the nicest of men. But my wife, I mean, she harmed no one. She was an innocent. So how could they do that? I rose up and I slaughtered the Philistines for what they had done. Then I retired into a cave in Edom for a time of rest, reflection, and decision. What am I going to do next? Well, shortly thereafter, 1,000 Philistine troops came into Judah looking for me. 3,000 of my troops went out to meet them and said, why are you here? What do you want? And they told him, well, we want Samson for what he's done. My troop says, well, just hang on. And they came down to talk to me and asked me, Samson, what did you do? Why did you do that? You need to come with us. I was afraid that they were going to kill me themselves, so I made them promise that that's not what was happening. So they tied my wrists together, took me out, and as I approached the Philistine, the Lord burnt the ropes from my arms. I looked down, there was a jaw of an ass, the jawbone of an ass laying on the ground. I picked it up. Now think about that for a minute. I was able to slide my hand into the jaw, the bone came up my wrist, and I waded into those troops. I slashed, I punched, I cut, and I killed 1,000 Philistines over the next few hours. Afterwards, I was exhausted. I cried out to the Lord, Lord, I am so thirsty. Don't let me die of thirst after this accomplishment. So depending on the Bible or the Talmud, what happened was a spring grew up out of the ground, or a spring flowed from my mouth. The bottom line was I was satiated. After that, I returned to Judah and took my rightful place as the head of the state, but more importantly, as the head of the armed forces of Judah. For 20 years, we went out and we battled against the Philistines. We had many successes, but we could never defeat them. But during that time, I was known as a good and fair leader. I was pious and pure. So I don't know what happened, whether it was a midlife crisis or what, but after 20 years, I went into Gaza and I saw this harlot. And I went to bed with her. Now, the Gazites, because apparently that's what the people of Gaza are called, as Gazites, knew who I was, so they arranged a trap for me in the morning. But I woke up early, went out, ripped the gates from their city, took it up, put it on the mountain, leaving their city vulnerable. A while later, I met the love of my life, Delilah. Now, the young guys now would probably say she was a shiksa because she was a Gentile, again, not a Jew. But she was so clever, a real match for my intellect. So we started spending some time together. After a while, the Philistine leaders came to her, a few of them, and said, look, we will each give you 1,100 shekels if you find out from Samson what his weakness is. A few days later, as we're lounging around the evening, Delilah said, Samson, you love me. Yeah. Tell me your weakness. So I thought about it. I said, well, tell you what. You wrap my wrist with 7 bowstrings that have not been dried, and I will be helpless. So she did that. I went to sleep. And in the middle of the night, I hear, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. Well, I woke up, broke the bowstrings, and slaughtered the elite assassins that had been sent to kill me. Some might say I'm not very bright, but she asked me again. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. Wrap my wrist with ropes, and I will be weak enough for you to overpower me. Did the same, and again, in the middle of the night, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are upon us. Snapped the ropes, slayed the assassins. Well, she kind of gave it up for a little bit, but then she said, Samson, please, you got to tell me the truth. So I said, here's what you got to do. Take 7 of my braids, weave them into a loom with cloth, tighten them with a pin, and I will be so restrained that I will be weak. So again, she did this. I went to sleep. Samson, Samson, please. The Philistines are upon us. Same deal. Broke it, killed them, bang. Time went on, and again, the Bible alludes that I told her, but I think it's kind of more like this. She found out I was a Nazirite, and she asked me, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, it means that I can't drink. She knew that was kind of blown. I couldn't eat unclean food. Well, she fed me that all the time. I had to live a pure life. Well, I was with her. Couldn't touch a dead carcass. Well, I kind of shared the story of the lion and the honey with her, so she knew that wasn't true. And last of all, I couldn't touch my head. Couldn't shave it. So she figured it out. So I went to sleep that night, and sure enough, she shaved my head, cried out, "Samson, Samson, the Philistines are here again." Well, I woke up, and I was weak as a kitten. There was nothing I could do. They took me out, they beat me, they tore out my eyes. It took me down to be a mill slave. Now, you need to understand what a mill slave was. There was a huge millstone, and all the mill slave did was walk around and around and around all day, grinding up the grain. Now, when mill slaves weren't available, they used bulls. Well, you know what bulls have another use for? The Philistine leaders would bring their wives to me at night and have them lay with me in the hopes that they would have strong sons who would grow up and defeat Judah. They shamed me to the core. So I kind of recommitted myself to God and started not drinking, which, I was a slave. I wasn't getting a whole lot of booze. Ate as much clean food as I could, pure life as I could, and they didn't notice that my hair started to grow back. So there was a festival. They were partying. There were 3,000 on top of the temple and a multitude of the leaders of the Philistines in the temple. Halfway through, they said, "Hey, where's that Goliath? Where's that Samson guy? Bring him in. I want to see about this guy and how strong he really is." So they brought me in. I had a young slave boy put me against two of the pillars, and I cried out, "Father God, I have sinned, but give me the strength this last time to bring this temple down." And I pushed, and the temple collapsed. Killed all the leaders and the 3,000 on top. So you might wonder, what's the moral? What's the symbolism in this? Well, you have to understand what the angel of God told my parents was that I would start the defeat of the Philistines in Judah. I kind of lost track of that I was to start it. I went off on my own and just said, I'm going to destroy the Philistines and drive them out. So I wasn't walking in God's will. Symbolism? They took out my eyes. I had used my eyes to sin against God with the harlot in Gaza and then with Delilah. And think of me walking around that millstone like a lost soul, just going around and around and around. Lastly, I was broken and destroyed, but God was still able to use me to fulfill His will. So even if we feel we're broken, we can still be God's vessel. Now, one of the things I hate about stories, it comes to the end of a story and it leaves some cliffhangers. So there's a couple of things here. One, what happened to me? Well, my siblings, they came down and got my body, because what had happened is as I pushed those pillars down, I fell back and was crushed as opposed to into the temple. So they were able to recover me, take me home for burial. The other thing is, what happened to Israel? Was the start enough? Well, my good friend Samuel, he rose up. The Philistine leaders were in disarray. There wasn't a whole lot left. So he was able to gather the armies of Judah and go out and drive the Philistines from Judah. So God's will, again, was done. Thank you. Worship team, if you could come up, I'll close this in prayer. Father God, I thank you for the opportunity I've had to share Samson's story this morning. I hope that we all have a more in-depth understanding of what it meant for him to serve you, not only in your strength, but through his weakness. I thank you for this, Holy God. Amen.